Thanks for joining us. And today we're going to talk about Kriya Yoga, self-realization, and awakening. So in Kriya Yoga, in particular schools, they use the term self-realization. And what this is normally referring to is the idea about soul realization, realizing the oneness of one's consciousness with the Atman, the soul, the imperishable soul, which is seen as a piece of spirit. So Atman meaning the soul, and the Param Atman meaning God or the Great Spirit. So the idea being that the Param Atman or God transfers an aspect of consciousness into the Atman, which is the individualized awareness, if you will, one as a soul. And the goal in Kriya Yoga, as some have said, is to realize one's permanent nature, one's permanent abiding soul. And there have been some Kriya Yoga schools, in particular Yogananda's lineage with his Self-Realization Fellowship, that actually use that in their name, Self-Realization Fellowship. So the idea that you are going to be one with the soul, and by realizing one's soul, it becomes one with spirit. But is that process actually how things work? Well, normally when people are doing meditation, in the beginning, they have a bodily consciousness, that their mind has worldly fixations. It might be preoccupations, worries, etc. It might be certain desires that one has. And that leads to one's interest and attention going outwards from the body, mostly into mind, into desires that are in the mind. What will happen when people sit down to do meditation, if they have no meditation practice and they just want to sit down and be quiet and meditate, their mind is going to be drawn all over the place. They will likely not have a very enjoyable meditation. They won't actually experience meditation because their consciousness, their awareness is in their thoughts. It's in distractions around them. It's in the uncomfortable bodily sensations they're experiencing, all of that kind of stuff. So they're at a situation where there's a barrier to be able to go into a internalized state. And that is exactly why Kriya Yoga is really good, because Kriya Yoga uses a form of intentional breathing that has an effect on one's central nervous system. It helps to bring one into a low idle state, right? And what happens is one's heart rate slows down, one's blood pressure becomes less, and one is drawn into a state where the body starts to disappear from one's awareness. And correspondingly, the mind may become very still, and one's breathing may become more subtle. So all of those things are really good for getting into pratyahara. This is what term that Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras talks about, internalization. This is a really good practice, evidence-based practice, to start to go into an internal state. So if you're looking to get into meditation with the goal of self-realization, then you can use something like Kriya Yoga, which leverages the parasympathetic nervous system to get you into a low idle state, and then everything starts to calm down, right? You get internalized, and then you find yourself in an area where you can start to become aware of your internal vistas, if you will, of all the things that are happening at a more subtle level than just your conscious mind running after particular desires or particular sense attachments. But does that process of internalization actually lead to self-realization, as some have claimed? Well, what happens when you start to get internalized and you start to become aware of your inner vistas without the distraction of the external world, without the distraction of conscious thinking, which can bring your awareness away from your internal meditation experiences? What you start to experience is the subtle aspects of your thoughts and feelings, which seem to come from who knows where. They percolate into one's awareness. At the same time, one can start to experience some nice sensations in the body, sensations of joy, happiness, or bliss in the body. It starts to radiate as one's attention goes deeper within. And you're really traversing from a more gross realm of the physical and mental into a more subtle realms that one can experience in meditation, realms of bliss, for example. And this can feel really, really good. And so some folks can think, oh, this is the Ananda Maya Kosha, meaning the bliss sheath of one's bodies that are part of the soul. One can experience this blissful awareness. And when one experiences it and hasn't had a similar experience in everyday life, it can be very impactful. One can become identified with that. And because that bliss seems to be unending and seems to be ever new, it can appear as if that is a permanent, lasting self, the Atman. It's a manifestation of the Atman, and people get identified with those experiences in meditation, the bliss. And so they say, this is great, I'm contacting my true nature. My true nature is bliss, and this bliss is one with the bliss of God. So I am traversing my way back to God. And so one can very well believe that, because you can have that experience of getting into a blissful state in meditation. If you haven't had that experience before, it can be very overwhelming. You can be thinking, wow, this is amazing. How can this happiness end? But as you become deeper attuned to going into those more rarefied states in meditation, you realize that they are not perpetual, that they are not constant, that they arise and they disappear. There's an impermanence to them. And further to that, you can actually, in your meditative experience, be in that bliss realm, be in that bliss experience, and actually move beyond it into something that is more subtle, where the bliss does not permeate. So if the experience of bliss is the permanent, lasting, unchangeable self, the Atman, the soul, and one can move beyond that, what does that mean? Does the soul end? Or is that the conception of the Atman as being this perpetual bliss is not actually correct, that it's not actually true? Yes, one can experience a blissful state of awareness and be in that, but one can go beyond that as well. And in one's everyday experience, one doesn't usually have an everyday experience every moment as bliss. Now, there are some yogis, especially in Kriya Yoga circles, that have claimed that this experience of this unending bliss in the body at all times and in one's meditation is the ultimate state of experience. But it's likely that that kind of experience was cultivated, concocted, created, that one was trying to be in that blissful state constantly, to tune into it as if one was tuning into a radio station of bliss and trying to be tuned to that at all times. And by being attuned to that bliss, saying that that is the ultimate, that is the permanent, that is the everlasting. But in actual fact, it isn't. So one can, in meditation, have these states that one experiences this incredible, infinite spaciousness, infinite joy and bliss, infinite consciousness, and also this nothingness where there's none of that either. And really what you're doing in meditation is tuning into those realms or consciousness levels, if you will, those vibrations, and perceiving that. But it doesn't mean that it's a permanent, lasting self. So if you were to bet on whether or not the permanent, lasting sense of self is a bliss, permanent, lasting sense of self, and you receive evidence to the contrary, what would be your conclusion? For me, I would conclude that the Atman, as described as this Satchitananda, ever-existing, ever-conscious, ever-new bliss, doesn't actually exist. That it was an experience that somebody identified with and later talked about as being the ultimate. One may have an experience of samadhi, of what is described as superconscious awareness, which might be a perception of infinite space, where there is nothing, it's just infinite space and it is overwhelming, or that it's infinite consciousness, infinite joy, infinite bliss. But those sensations, those experiences, arise and disappear. They are impermanent and not everlasting. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with understanding that the territory in meditation is about exploring those realms and going beyond them to the highest states that we can go to. And to draw our conclusions from looking at the entire picture rather than a portion of it. But just because one has perceived one of those bliss realms and becomes identified with it doesn't mean that one has awakened. What awakening really is realizing what is actually there, realizing the facts about the nature of existence. So to do that, if you only take a portion of what you're experiencing and call that the whole truth, well, you're missing a whole bit of other stuff. This is a recipe for ignorance. So we can see that a crucial stumbling block in awakening is identifying with one's experience, that one needs to see things as they really are, meaning if you're experiencing this state of bliss, that you see that it arises, that you experience it, that you see that it disappears as you move beyond it, and that you don't cling to it, that you don't identify with it, that you let it go. And that is a crucial aspect in awakening, is learning how to perceive what one perceives in meditation and letting it go. Not identifying with it, realizing its impermanence, realizing that if we do hang on to it, it creates suffering for us because we become identified with it, because we cling to it, that we become it. It creates a sense of identity. And then when it changes, we experience suffering. And so if one becomes too concentrated or too absorbed in meditation on one's meditation object, for instance, bliss, there is a tendency to identify, to say, I am the bliss. Or if one has an experience of an Ishtadevata, one's form of the divine, that they hold on to that they identify with that. And that absorption, that concentration, that lack of letting go creates ignorance. So what you need to do is to let things go, to experience the deepest levels of meditation without clinging to them, to allow them to arise, to pass away. And by doing that, you'll be able to see the true nature of those states, that in the true nature of existence. And by doing that, one will be able to see the true nature of those states, the true nature of existence, and to start to have an experience of awakening. So if you have any questions about this video, feel free to send me an email at info@modernkriya.com. Also check our website at modernkriya.com and our YouTube channel. And so thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.